Yeah, so I threw together, it's just a basic framework, a basic few key ideas that you can use as you're thinking about not only repurposing an event. You can think these work for other things as well, but these are kind of the lessons that I learned when I had to repurpose, a massive all-day event into months worth of content. So I'll kind of run through, there's 5 key areas here that I can kind of walk through for everybody. So the first one is planning everything ahead of time. And basically what you need to think about is every one of those sort of who, what, when, where, why questions. You want to think through those in terms of who's your audience. And again, this is the learning. I didn't have the benefit of being there when we planned it out, but again, I got lucky. Like, we had such good speakers, we had such good,
Let me interrupt. This was Justin's second month of being at Metadata, like I think almost to the day. So Justin had not been here for quite some time. So when you talk about throwing somebody to the wolves, like, this is a perfect example. All right.
Yeah, totally. But I think part of it too is like, we had really good content. If I would have gotten thrown at another company with another event, like, that's not maybe exactly what's going to happen. So, I feel lucky in that case. But understanding who you're targeting, then what do you want out of that repurposed content? So you've got this video or session. What do you want out of it? Like, are you doing YouTube? Are you doing LinkedIn? Are you posting it on your website? Like, do you want to turn it into do you just want a transcript? So figuring out what you want. And then when. And I think that's the biggest piece for the planning piece of it is the when. So then you start to plan that out. So literally, I can't remember what week it was, but I remember Mark was like, hey, I really want like a content calendar. Like, I want to see, like, it's something we're missing. Like, what do we have? Like, what do we have coming? So I took all of the demand stuff. So everything that was going to go on our website, everything that was going to go on YouTube, everything that was going to go on LinkedIn, and it all got put on a calendar and Asana and mapped out. So we knew in probably early October exactly what video was going to drop January 4th. Like, that's how planned out this was. And what that does is after the event, like, as a content person, it was awesome because for me, I had put in the work, the prep work, the figuring out when we wanted to drop that. And I could just kind of sit back and then just as the pieces came in, publish them out and get them out and get them rolling and then plan on what's going to come next, which for us was this podcast, ironically enough. Like, I had enough of a content engine built out off of demand that I could take my full focus and pivot it over to this podcast and start prepping for that and getting that rolling. So planning is massive. Like, that's why I put it number 1, like, plan out what you want. And it leads perfectly into number 2, which is pick your distribution channels. And I touched on it, but like, really figure out where you want your stuff to go. Because I think part of the problem when you're redistributing anything, but especially with video content, is like the default is to put it on YouTube. That might not work. I think that I'll talk about that in some of the lessons we learned, but like, YouTube might not work for you. Do you have a YouTube channel? Or are you active on YouTube? Does it even make sense for your business? Are you going to, some people might even try to just take the YouTube video and then just put that directly on LinkedIn or put that, that doesn't work. So, figure out what you want to do. And for us, what we ended up deciding was we were going to go on YouTube. That was a place we wanted to go. We were getting a little bit of traction there. And so we just wanted to use demand as sort of a springboard to be able to do that. We also did LinkedIn. That's where most of our focus is for social and distribution, is organic LinkedIn. So we crushed that. And then the third one, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, Mark, is email and what we did with email and how, we kind of revamped our email program through demand.
I think revived or brought back from the dead is a better way of saying that. You're too nice. But we, up until Justin joining, we were a team of 2 full-time marketers. So you can imagine what that was like, and it was probably a little bit crazier than what you're imagining right now. We started to do email in early 2021 and got some really good feedback on the types of emails that we were sending out. We then went radio silent as we redid our messaging, our positioning, the website, and people didn't really hear from us at all. So we knew, and Justin and I have nerded out over this at length, we knew that we needed to not only get email back up and running again, but also send really, really good emails. Email's a channel that we want to own. So what we did was each week coming out of demand, whichever new episode or recording that we were going to be releasing, we would send a really good email out every Tuesday like clockwork, and we set that expectation that it was coming from me. You could, already anticipate what was going to be in there. You had the link to the recording. You had a really solid summary of what was in there, and like people were responding to those emails. I've never seen anything like that in my life, so I was blown away by that.
Yeah, it was awesome too. I think that was one of the main drivers. I actually know for sure it was one of the main drivers of getting traction for that content, because we would share it on social, we'd get some interaction, and when we do stuff on social, it's not necessarily to get people to the site anyway. But whenever we'd send an email, page hits spike, video views spike, all of that, right? Because we had an engaged audience who said they wanted this content, and now we're just dripping it out every single week. And granted, that, like Mark said, the email content's solid and people actually did respond to it, but it was awesome. I waited for those emails so I could check the stats, because the email would go and I could see all the stats spike. So,
I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely like figure out what your distribution channels are. If you're not using email, maybe try that. It worked out really well for us to be able to give us basically an excuse to email our audience and give them helpful content every single week. So that was awesome. 3, reverse engineer what you want. That is so you've got your channels, you understand where you want to go. Maybe you say, okay, I want to go LinkedIn. That defines what you then want out of that. So if you're thinking LinkedIn, then you probably don't need 10-minute video cuts. You might want a minute to 30-second video cuts. So okay, that narrows down your focus there. So now you're looking for that. And then I mentioned it earlier, but this is where the hard work comes in, because once you know what you want, then you have to go through and actually like watch the content, or pay somebody to watch the content and figure out what the best parts are. And that's a tip too that I would say is I've been on both sides of that. I have done recorded content, and I've paid somebody, an outside agency, to decide what the titles were that were going to go in the clips, decide which clips to pull, decide what the text goes with the clips. And for demand, I did the exact opposite. I did all the hard work of writing out all of the titles that go with every social clip we post, and figuring out what the timestamps are and what we needed cut, and what are the titles for the YouTube videos, and how does that tie in with the content that we decide to pull. So there's some nitty-gritty work there that you need to figure out.
I honestly think that was one of the biggest, like if you were to look back in hindsight, that was one of the biggest factors in terms of what made this so successful, was that the content stuck out for all the right reasons, because we did not outsource that.
Yeah, and again, I think once you know what you want, it sets you up for a framework. So, to kind of pull the curtain behind even more, like I just threw a doc together and I said, okay, can I get 3 YouTube videos out of this? And I would go through the content, and sometimes it was yes, sometimes it was like 5, like I think you have to be flexible when you're doing that, but like set the expectation of like, okay, this session has 3 really good questions and answers that this panel goes through. Those are probably a starting point to be able to cut into YouTube videos. So I would just watch the video clip, get the timestamps, put it in a Google Doc, and I would do that for all the YouTube ones. And then for social, it was funny, like the first one, I think I pulled like 17 videos for social, because it was just like gold. Like there was more and more stuff coming out of it. I'm like, this like fits our audience. It's the perfect topic. Like so many opinions. Like if you have a really strong opinion, like that's money. Grab that quote. But then other ones, there might have been like 3, or some of it was like, this doesn't, So I think being flexible in terms of that, like my goal was 3 YouTube clips and 5 social videos out of each session. That was the goal. Some were more, some were less. But at least I had an idea and a starting point to go, because I think otherwise it just is way too overwhelming of like, there's so much content I could pull out of here. Should I, pull 20? And it's like, not always. It doesn't matter. Yeah, you got anything, Mark?
No, I think I totally agree with that, because if you are too rigid when it comes to that, then you kind of put out mediocre content. So like if you're trying to say we have to have 10 social cuts from every single session, like some of the sessions were incredible. A lot of them were. Some of them were good. I think some of them were were maybe a little too advanced, and like that was a big learning for us too. And we wouldn't have learned that unless we did this event. So I think flexibility was key, and then just knowing, hey, there are going to be specific sessions where you get a ton of gold from, and that's great. And there may be some that you thought you were going to get some gold from and you didn't get nearly as much, and that's also fun.
Yep, totally. And this one is particular to launches and particular to event launches. Number 4 is record your sessions before. We had talked about that a little bit earlier, but that is such a help to be able to get that content out and be able we'll have to, we haven't started talking about Demand 2022 yet, but like we'll have to figure out what that mix is between like recorded and live, and because I think there's something to be said for live content as well. But having some of that content be recorded was just so helpful, because then it just allowed us to drop that stuff as soon as the event was over, keep that momentum going, and be able to actually drive traffic to it. The exact same thing could be said for like a webinar. Like if you do a webinar, how fast can you get, if you pre-record it, maybe you launch it again, soon after, but how can you plan to be able to get that stuff out and be able to cut that up quicker?
So I went into this thinking that it was going to be kind of lame that we had this many recorded sessions. And I think the reason why it blew me away, and we cover it in the last episode, was the plan wasn't just to pre-record them. The plan was to pre-record them and then give you access to whoever the speaker or panelists were in the chat. So if we would have just had pre-recorded sessions and you couldn't ask questions directly to those experts in the chat, no one wants that. But because we made those people available, so you had access to ask really whatever you wanted, like I think it's that combination that really drove the experience.
Absolutely, yeah. Having it to where it's not, I don't feel like I'm just watching a video. Actually, there's another element to that. And number five, this one, it's not something that came to mind at first, but it's definitely one that, as I thought through and tried to lay this out, like what was something that I maybe didn't think of at first, it's number 5, don't skip on the details. And really what I mean by that is things like branding. So one of the things for Demand is we had awesome branding for Demand. We had a whole sub-brand built out just for an event. And so that, and especially when you're thinking about the details of repurposing video content, the more that I got into it, the more I realized, like, oh man, there's so many things we need. So we need a music track. We need maybe a video stinger to play at the beginning of our videos. We need social wrappers to be like, what does we'll make a social video. Okay, that sounds great. But then like, what does that look like? There's a lot of details that go into those things that I didn't think of at first.
You don't know how difficult it is to find good background music for videos like this until you actually have to do it and sift through the million horrendous recordings. So anyone who's done that before, how painful it is. And by focusing on details like that, that helps your content stand out.